Good morning. My name is Shane Saxon, and this is Joe Petleski from Sturgeon Bay Community Church with another episode of the Sturgeon Bay Community Church podcast radio show, where we are talking about Joe Petleski's sermon from this Sunday on Psalm 131, another installment in our Songs of Ascent series, where we are literally studying, thinking about, being inspired by songs written multiple thousands of years ago that still carry this incredible weight of truth and inspiration and beauty and are a source of strength and encouragement for people all around the world. And we spent about 30 minutes on Sunday thinking about it. And so what we want to continue to do today together is just bring those thoughts and those meditations forward. Maybe think about some of the things that you thought about in your study of Psalm 131 that you didn't say. Sure. And then also just try to apply this text to ourselves, just so that we can walk a little bit more closely to the way of Jesus. So, Joe, when you preach Psalm 131 on Sunday, can you just give me a sense of what this psalm is about? Give me the big picture. What was the overarching idea?
Yeah, if you've been following this sermon series in our church, I've tried to make every sermon a one-word title to be able to really encapsulate these kind of pithy, punchy songs because they're not, by and large, they're fairly short. So, like, what's one memorable concept that we can draw from each of these? And this week's was contentment. And I think contentment is, maybe among any other traits right now is probably the least felt, the hardest thing to try to grasp in this culture right now for a number of different reasons. So I think this is especially kind of a poignant, simple, short yet poignant psalm.
Sit on that for a minute. What is it about our modern day? You're making the claim that there's something about being alive today that makes it hard to be content. What do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, there's a pace of life that feeds into that. There's a kind of a frenetic energy around news cycles and information that I don't think we've ever experienced at that sort of kind of pace and volume. I think there's just a continual need to kind of be known as our loneliness kind of increases. Even though supposedly we're more connected, we feel less connected, and I think it's creating a real vacuum in our hearts for wanting to be known and wanting to be loved. So I think that really creates a void of contentment in our souls.
Yeah, and the unique and kind of radical claim that we're making at our church is that if you want to address that, at least one thing you can do is read an ancient book and think about it.
Right. And here's 3 verses that are going to have profound impact on that.
Yeah. So jumping into those verses, you nodded at this a little bit, but I kind of want to explore it a little bit more.
Okay.
This song, it has this description at the beginning, that could be translated for David, from David, of David, by David. It's totally conjecture, but it's one of those. Right. How do you understand that? And then what do you see as the significance of that ascription?
Yeah. So most of these psalms in this set, the Songs of Ascent, from Psalm 121 to 134, are anonymous. But then there's 4, maybe 5, but 4 particularly that are ascribed to David somehow. Of David. What does that exactly mean? Does that mean the psalm was written by him? Does that mean the psalm is for him? Does that mean the psalm is kind of speaking more generally of him, of the king? Scholars seem to be split there. For me, it seems to be, and I said this in the sermon, this seems to be more the idea of being about the king, not necessarily written by the king. Yeah. Now, I guess there's a lot of conjecture. You might be able to speak to this as far as is this pre-exilic? Is this post-exilic? There's a lot of debate there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't totally know, and I think every time you're trying to speculate about the history that lies behind a text, you're kind of risking a lot.
Sure.
But it did strike me that Israel's greatest king, the only king to unite all of Israel, David.
Yeah.
The one that anybody, even if you're not a Christian or a Jew today, if you say King David, everyone knows who David is.
For
the
sure.
Star of David. And yet, this psalm is about humility.
Mm-hmm.
Like if there was one ancient king who ought to be able to say, I'm the man, it's David.
Right.
And yet here's a song of David, and he doesn't lift up his eyes. He doesn't occupy himself with great things. He's humble. And then, I think there's probably that piece. And then also I think the next psalm next week is going to talk about David quite a bit.
For sure.
And so it seems like that connection. But I do think there's something about the ideal leader of Israel was David. All the promises about messiahs are the Messiah of David, the shoot from the stump of Jesse, the Lion of Judah. All of these references to the greatness of their king, and yet when we sing a song about him, it's about his humility.
Yeah, and honestly, this point is driven home, as I was, researching for this next week of, let's review David's life for a moment. He slew lions and bears as a shepherd. He slayed the giant. He was chased around and pursued by King Saul. Wound up in a cave with all the rejects of Israel, and on and on and on. Wars with the Philistines, usurped by his son Absalom, murder for hire in Uriah. Adultery with Bathsheba. I mean, this man's life was a train wreck.
Yes.
And yet in these quiet moments, here's these three verses of a humble man. A man after God's own heart, surely in the sense of I've made a mess of my life, and yet I've found somehow to be content in the Lord. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I do think there's some beauty. Whether he wrote it or not, it should be true of him. Yeah. I hope it's true of him.
Yeah, and this is what people thought of him when they thought of him.
For sure.
Which is, I think, significant, especially when it comes to leadership. Mm-hmm. It reminds me, this is getting a little far afield, but, there's one king in all of England's history who is called Great. You know who this is?
I do not.
Alfred.
Okay.
So Alfred the Great. And they memorialized Alfred. G.K. Chesterton has this amazing poem where in the opening line, it's Alfred just looking out, and Alfred says, it's only a great man who can rule a little kingdom. And that's because the reason he was great is because he was humble. Even though he defeated the Northumbrians and united England, he was humble. And he dedicated himself to the people. And that's could be hagiography. But here I think you have a similar concept where they thought of their greatest ruler as humble.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
And so that's what they get into in your first point, is this figure doesn't allow his heart to get too high. He doesn't lift up his eyes. What do you think the imagery here is getting at, and how did you bring that point home?
Yeah, there seems to be in this kind of, the poet is using location. And so there's a sense of there's a realm that's high and lifted up. There's a realm that's divine. There's a realm that exists outside of kind of the common mundane things of this world. And so the poet is using this language of high and lofty and proud. All of these things kind of center around this idea of pride or haughtiness. And the poet's making the point here, like, this is not the realm that I live in. Because God is other, the divine is other. I am but a common man, interested in common things, because that is as far as I think of myself. And so I think you're missing something if you're not feeling that kind of gulf.
Yeah.
In that first verse.
Yeah, it brings this connection that you said this sermon's about contentment. Mm-hmm. But it goes right to humility to start. Can you draw those together? Yeah,
there's a lowliness to it. And I think the way that we bridge this forward is understanding, what's not being said, which is, if I am not that, then who is that? And that is God. And God is depicted, by the way, not in this psalm, but elsewhere in Scripture, as always looking down. He is the God of the heavens who looks down from his throne. We worship at his footstool. So therein again is this picture of, like, we are but just at his feet, and he is the one who looks down upon his creation, who condescends to, bend your ear to my prayers, Lord. And all of that language denotes this kind of this difference that's
Yeah.
in location.
Yeah, it's a sense in that our discontent so often comes from occupying ourselves with things that really we have no control over. We're not God. And we want to be great, and we want to accomplish, and we want to be, it's our pride that drives this striving. And the wisdom of this opening line is that all you have to do is realize who you actually are. And then you wouldn't be striving. You wouldn't be trying to build. You wouldn't be trying to achieve. You'd be keeping your heart low. You'd be keeping your eyes down because you would realize who you are in relationship to who God is.
There is, Shane, a great cultural milieu underneath. The culture is always the stuff that we don't pay attention to. It's the subconscious curriculum that's being taught to us, and that's always ambition. That's always driving and striving towards betterment, status, wealth, privilege, something that you don't have that you need. And this really flies into the face of that. I'm not going to go about doing things that are beyond me.
Yeah.
And recognizing if you start in a place of humility, then those things are the regular, normal, mundane things. Be faithful in those things. Abide in those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you've kind of referenced that final line of verse 1, which is that he's not occupied with things that are too great for him and too wonderful for him. Yeah. How many people even have the humility to say that there are things out there that are too great and wonderful for them?
Right.
This is the American persona, is that there isn't anything too great or wonderful for me. I just have to put my mind to it. It
is the great it's the blessing and the curse of the American dream. The blessing is the ingenuity and the creativity, and that part is certainly God-given. The dark shadow side of that is I can do anything.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that can hold me back. I am the captain of my fate. I am the master of my soul.
Yeah.
That sort of mentality.
And when anyone who has kids knows that your kids are kind of happiest, and they function best when they are understanding their limits. It's when they start to, there's a vagary around what they can or shouldn't do in particular contexts. That's when they get anxious. And yet for us, it's maybe acknowledge that you're not going to be an NBA player and you won't be worried about it, and you just take that to every sector of life. And that's the wisdom here.
Sure. And I think even a step further than that, because, NBA is such an extreme example of the 1%, but can I be content as an insurance salesman? Mm-hmm. Can I be content as a school teacher? Can I be content as a mother or as a father? Whatever. The normal things even. Mm-hmm. Can I be content even in those seemingly insignificant sort of ways?
Oh.
Yeah.
So then how does the psalmist respond to that humility? What does he achieve, and how does he describe it in verse 2?
Yeah, so there's certainly a contrast here, and you and I have talked about the kind of an interesting language here, because there's in verse 2 it could say, but I've not calmed and quieted, or if I've not calmed and quieted my soul, and kind of this hanging clause out there. Almost kind of questioning himself. If I don't do this, and then it just kind of dots. But either way, he's saying in contrast to raising my eyes too high or having my heart lifted up, I've gone the opposite direction, or I hope I aspire to do that, and that is to calm and quiet his soul. And I love this because you would think it would say, but God has done this. But he's saying, well, no, I've done this. And it really, for me, it made me think of Paul's assertion in Philippians chapter 4, that I have learned the secret of contentment. Mm-hmm. This is a discipline that I've had to learn, that I have to do this thing. And the psalmist kind of concurs here. I've done this thing in my soul.
Yeah. Well, I think you can always use, I've maybe mentioned this every time we've done this, but you can use Psalm 1 as kind of a background for almost every psalm, and that is the ideal person. The idea that the psalmist is writing about is one who has planted himself deeply near streams of water by meditating on the law night and day.
Yeah,
and so when this person quiets his soul and sits still, it's for the purpose, I think, of putting the eyes not too high, but onto the Word, to meditate on who God is. And that's the secret of this person's contentment, is they've set their eyes, they've put the mind of Christ inside of them, to use the anachronistic language, but they've made God's law their meditations day and night. And that has this transformative power inside of us. This psalm is speaking towards the life that isn't striving and achieving with frenetic activity, but a life that sets huge sets of time aside so they can sit with God. As Jesus says, abide with him, to be quiet and to be okay in the quiet, just with Jesus, with God. That's what this person is going after.
Yeah, that's so well said. And, we are always meditating on something. There's some voice. It's either the internal monologue that we're kind of constantly, telling ourselves. It's that voice we're kind of listening to, but we're always somewhat paying attention to, or it's God's voice.
Yeah.
And to kind of go outside of yourself and say, stop talking to myself, be quiet, soul, and listen to another voice. Is when we can begin to, cultivate that discipline. And it's a striving, but it is also the arresting at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then the metaphor that the psalmist uses is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a beautiful picture. I don't, I kind of like, could he have used a different picture probably, but like, I don't think there's a better one than this idea of a child in his mother's arms. And so the big debate is, what does he mean by weaned?
Yeah.
And is this like a child who, obviously a weaned child has separated himself from his mother, and that's kind of the whole gist of the term, is like, well, I'm no longer nursing, now I can eat solid food. And so I brought this up again in the sermon that, is this a symbolic move from not relying on one's earthly parents to maybe God as our heavenly parent? Could be, but I think the better picture is that this is a nursed child. This is a child, and this is a child who has been filled up upon the nourishment of his mother, and now he's sated. Now he's satisfied.
You know what I'm going to say?
Yeah, do it.
This is a baby that's milk drunk.
Milk drunk.
Like every baby, after they've had their fill, they're milk drunk. The look on their face is like, I'm good.
That's right.
I think that's the image here. I agree with you.
For sure.
It's that latter interpretation, like a weaned child by his mother.
Yeah. There's a calmness that comes over them. The eyes kind of roll in the back of their head. You think of, too, just this idea of like longing for the pure milk of the word comes to mind of, there's a nourishment. Man shall not live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God that fills us up. That's sweet to the taste. That's like honey. That's nourishment to the bones. All of those kind of images of like nourishment and being filled. Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's like the psalmist puts the exclamation mark on it. And it's not just for him, the writer, it's for his people. This is a distinct people. And he says, hope in the Lord. And not just today, but tomorrow, and then for eternity.
Right.
Hope and wait on the Lord.
Yeah, there's a beautiful move here, and you should catch it in Psalm 130 from last week and this week, that there's a deeply intimate personal picture that happens. And there almost seems to be a turning point of like, okay, I'm good. And that I'm good now turns outward. And I think that's that's the beauty of the Christian life, those brief moments of self-understanding, self-identity, we're good, we're abiding in Christ. And then that naturally makes us want to turn outward to our brothers and sisters, to people in our community, and go experience the blessing of what I've felt.
There's this phrase that people are using right now that I think is really helpful to describe a person who's mature as a non-anxious presence. This comes out of a certain kind of school of therapy. And I think that this Psalm 131 could be the recipe for becoming a non-anxious presence.
For sure.
Because what do? You humble yourself, understand your limits, and then spend time abiding with Christ.
That's right.
Calmed your soul. And then when you turn to your people, to the rest of the people you're in relationship with, you're able to relate to them from this just purely non-anxious self that is fully satisfied with God, not striving, not achieving, but content.
Yeah. Yeah, because, the nature of our relationships, and I'm speaking in earthly human terms here, is always like transactional. And what am I going to get from you, and what can I give to you, and what can I get back from you? But when you're abiding, I need nothing. I'm not here for any kind of mercenary reason other than to bless you because I've been blessed.
Yeah.
And therein lies the lack of anxiety. And I mean, I think that's what most people are desirous of at this point. So, yeah, and it is. And there's the beautiful kind of time aspect of not just now. You're not just waiting in this moment where maybe your circumstances topsy-turvy, but from this time unto eternity.
Hope in the Lord.
Oh, hope in the Lord.